I built a DIY terrarium out of a $78 IKEA cabinet. Let me start from the beginning. I'm gonna just quickly speed through the actual build process of the shelf because that's not what you're here for, and it was unnecessarily complicated. It wouldn't have to do with me throwing out the directions, would it? With that out of the way, I could finally get some shopping done to pick up the items I needed. I got foam boards to act as the base of my background and a misting pump. Yoink! I also grabbed some expanding foam and silicone. Off camera, I picked up some soil, and surprisingly there are some really nice tropical plants in stock. This one here is Pilea cautery, or the aluminum plant. I also bought a creeping fig as well as some species of Dracaena. When I got home, I measured and cut the foam boards to fit the interior of the terrarium. Next, I sanded the surface of each piece of foam board so the expanding foam I would add later would stick to it. This process was super messy, so I definitely recommend not doing it inside. I then took a mix of cork bark and ghost wood and started constructing the hardscape. My idea was to mimic the look of a canopy with branches growing upwards and outwards and vines and plants growing all over. Also, I added little plastic pots so that I could put soil for the plants. I then sprayed expanding foam over the entire structure and gave it 24 hours to sit. And now time for carving ASMR! Once the surface layer of all the foam was carved, I vacuumed up all the dust to make sure there was nothing to prevent the silicone from sticking. Then, I started preparing the dirt substrate. For this project, I used a mix of sphagnum moss, tropical potting soil, and orchid bark. This mixture is basically my take on an ABG mix, and this mix really serves my purposes well for the type of terrarium that I'm trying to make because it'll really retain that humidity and provide nutrients for all the plants. I also added some horticultural charcoal because I eventually plan to make this a bioactive enclosure with ice pods and springtails. Finally, it was time to add the silicone. At first, I tried doing this section by section, but that was really taking too long and the silicone wasn't sticking as well because it was getting mixed in with the dirt. So I then opted to instead cover the entire structure with silicone and then add the dirt afterwards. This method was way faster and more efficient, so if I ever do this again, I'm definitely going to be doing it all in one take.
"2,000 years later."
At this point, it was starting to come together, so I used one of the glass shelves that came with the IKEA cabinet to hold in the soil. Then I washed some hydrogen. These are super porous clay balls that I've seen used in things like aquaponics, and they basically allow the water to seep through and prevent root rot in the plants above them. I'll be honest, I'm not sure why I added carbon at this point, but I did. Because right after, I added non-metal window screen to separate the soil, which has carbon, from the hydrogen. And then I added carbon right afterwards. So I don't know why I did it. Oh, and I also tend to use carbon and charcoal interchangeably. They're the same thing. Then I gave the soil a quick misting so it would pack together better and I wouldn't have any issues when I'm putting the background in. At this point, I also decided to put some LEDs on the back of the enclosure because I thought it would look really awesome. And then it was time for the background to go in. Except it didn't fit. Yeah, like I tried multiple times, it didn't fit. So I tried the only thing that I thought might work, and I took off the top of the terrarium and I tried to bring it in from above. It worked! Now all that was left to do was rinse off all my plants and get to planting. If you see any new plants, it's definitely not because I couldn't resist buying them after the initial shopping trip. Now, I'm not too picky about how much soil is left on my plant's roots before I put them into a terrarium, but I know some people really are. To each their own, this is the way I do things. I've never had any issues, but if you'd rather be safe than sorry, I say go for it. My personal logic is that I like to keep as much of the roots intact as possible, so if I see any chance of damaging them, I just leave them alone. Once all the plants were washed, I finally got to planting. And to be honest, this process didn't take me as long as I thought it would. I think I just had a really good vision of where I wanted everything to go, and it was just a matter of putting it together. I started by adding the plants that would take up the most room and had the largest leaves, and then detailed it with other smaller plants after. Then I rehydrated some moss to add it to the terrarium. Moss serves a really cool dual purpose of being both really appealing to look at and really good at maintaining a high humidity. A little trick I learned is you can use folded up paper clips to hold the moss in place until it attaches to your substrate. With the last of the plants added, that's the end of the build, and we're on to the Glamour Shots. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a ton and it's completely free. Other than that, have a great life.